Hi class, it's Miss Miller. Thank you for joining me as we take a look at Flowers for Algernon from yet another approach. We're doing a continued critical theories in literature, a closer look. This one happens to be a formalist look. So if we're putting ourselves in the position or point of view of as a formalist, we're going to be examining the form in the text. Now you're going to be very pleased to know that a formalist approach is really something that we are all familiar with. This is typically how most classes are run. They look at imagery, they look at symbols, they look at theme, they look at all the details to help us develop the meaning. So let's see exactly what that means for a formalist approach. You should also know that formalist approach is a bit rigid and what we're sort of accustomed to, so that's why we've sort of moved away from it. So when we do a formalist approach, the emphasis is on how. I want to say it again, how versus what. So we're not so concerned about what the content is. We're more concerned with how the text is developed. How is it done? So if you look at these two images, and these are sort of out of context here, but we have something, a painting by Da Vinci and another artwork by Michelangelo. We're not necessarily looking at the image, but we're looking at the form. How is it made? I don't know enough about art to tell you all of the different techniques that are used to develop these images, but the focus, if we were looking at this art from a formalist point of view, we would be focused not on the lady and this image with the hair, but we would be looking at how does the artist, how does Da Vinci go about creating this image? Now, for a formalist approach, there are 3 R's, and this is a nice little way to help you sort of remember it when I say, I want you to look at this text from a formalist perspective. You've got this idea of form, but think about the R. One is the reoccurrences. What are the reoccurrences in the text? What are the patterns? In this case, if we look at Flowers for Algernon, the events that tend to reoccur is this idea that Charlie is sort of made fun of on occasion, several occasions before he has this surgery on his brain. So we can find multiple instances in the text where this event reoccurs. It may not happen in the exact same way, but he's made fun of. We see the scene where he's with his friends and they sort of set him up. And then we could look at the text to be very specific about that. Then the second R is repetition. What continues to show up over and over and over again? Specifically, this is more exact. So, for example, I failed, I failed, I failed. Throughout the text, from beginning to at least the middle or even the end, you'll see that he gets the sense that he failed. And this word continues to, or this phrase continues throughout the text. The one that I noticed in the very beginning is, are they going to use me, use me, use me? And so that repetition is sort of over and over again, this phrase. And so it's exact. And so we as a formalist, if we're looking at it from a formalist perspective, we're going to be looking for the reoccurrences. We're going to be looking for the repetition. And the third R would be relationships. What are the relationships between the characters? What's the dynamics? And so when we extended the text beyond our short excerpt, we saw quite a bit going on. It gave us more insight, right? When we looked at it from a feminist perspective, we noticed all these different characters and the impact that all of the women had on Charlie, not just his friends and Dr. Newmar and Dr. Strauss. So when you look at the final R in formalist, for the formalist approach, you also want to examine the relationships and how they all sort of tie together to develop the meaning. Again, we're not necessarily focused on the content of the text. We're looking at the form. We're looking at the little pieces. Now, the idea for a formalist in terms of developing meaning is they take all the little tiny details, every little piece, and nooks and cranny, everything, and that's how they develop this part of a whole. So some of the smaller parts that help us equal the whole, one would be diction. And diction is just a fancy word for word choice. What choice of words does the author uses in the text to sort of communicate his ideas? And part of diction would be allusions, which would be, and we're going to see in the next couple slides specifically what that is, but it's a direct reference to another piece, whether it's a biblical reference, whether it's a mythological reference, whether it's a rhyme, a nursery rhyme, but it's a reference to something else, assuming that us as a reader are very familiar with this reference, and that is an allusion. So then we don't have to tell the entire story. It's just, as long as we know the story, we'll get why that allusion is made. And then symbol is another part of diction, which would be, as we found later in the text, and we'll show you that in a subsequent slide, about the symbols that show up in Flowers for Algernon. The other thing is punctuation, or lack thereof. So I'm sure we can find several sentences in Flowers for Algernon that sort of give us some idea of, you know, the lack of intelligence of Charlie, because it is from his point of view. And so point of view, by the way, is also really important in a formalist approach, and the impact or effect this has on the reader. We develop some sort of compassion for him. But punctuation, this helps us to kind of give us insight, like, wow, this guy is not so bright. And then we also see in the punctuation, as it sort of shifts and changes, it shows us the metamorphosis, as you might call it, that happens to Charlie as he sort of goes from this not so bright or slow character to this highly intelligent. It's from one extreme to the other, which I think is quite interesting. And then the third part, or smaller part of the whole, would be the syntax. For us as the reader to sort of evaluate the reading for the syntax. Syntax is just the order of words. We're used to, you know, the subject and the verb, right? But how does Charlie sort of communicate his language? Does he use the typical syntax? So when we look at the text closely, I'll be able to really show you exactly what that means in terms of this text. So here are the allusions that are made in the text. There's one, these are short stories, Paradise Lost, and then there's another one, Robin Crusoe. Now these are made later on in texts that Charlie actually begins to read. He actually reads through these. These are really dense texts. They have really complex meanings, and these are mentioned later when he, after his surgery, after he's really smart. So the assumption is, Daniel Keyes is assuming that we've read Paradise Lost, we've read Robin Crusoe, so he doesn't have to explain it to us. He just inserts the title in our text, or a phrase from it, and then we're supposed to make our own meaning out of it. So this is one example of an approach that a formalist would use, and we're accustomed to this because oftentimes in literature we're asked to look at, you know, the allusions. So this, I'm taking a piece of work that you guys actually did in class, but this is Algernon as a symbol. And what you guys identified is that he, Daniel Keyes is who I'm referring to, mentioned the word Algernon 42 times just in our short excerpt. And so what you guys did, again, I just want to reiterate, is that you found specific examples in the text where he actually references it. So this is, we can see right away that Algernon sort of functions or serves as a symbol in the text. And again, as a formalist, you're going to look for allusions. You're going to look for symbols. You're going to look for imagery. You're going to look for point of view. You're going to look for all these different pieces to sort of put things together. We're not so focused on the content. And incidentally, it's not necessarily focused on the historical reference. It's not necessarily interested in the time frame in which the text is written. It's not, a formalist wouldn't be interested in examining the text from the author's point of view. We don't care about what happened in the author's life. Now, we may have shown an interest in that when we looked at it from a feminist perspective or a psychoanalysis where we wanted to delve deeper into the author to help us give us insight. From a formalist point of view, that is totally obsolete. So getting back to symbol, a symbol obviously is where you have this mouse, in this case Algernon, this white mouse, who perhaps has additional meaning outside of itself. And so we have to figure out what that means, and that's going to be your job. But we know it's a symbol because it shows up in the beginning of the text, it shows up in the middle of the text, and it's at the end. So this, if it's repeated over and over again, it's important, it's significant, so we need to pick up on that. And symbols also can change meaning. So it may have a couple of meanings in the text. You may say, oh wow, this Algernon really represents this, but as it changes throughout the text, it may be one purpose in the beginning and then it changes towards the end. So we have to develop the meaning after we sort of look at all of these examples of how this mouse is sort of referenced in the text, and sort of decide for ourselves what the meaning, what is it symbolic of, what purpose does it serve. So from a formalist read, again, there's 4 points of emphasis. One is on the tension, this buildup. This whole time in the very beginning, Charlie wants nothing more than to be smart. So there's this tension in the very beginning. He just wants to be smart. He'll do anything. He doesn't care at what cost. He doesn't care if it's permanent. Thank you, Ms. Kenyon, for referring us to this idea of getting this surgery. And so this tension, this buildup. And then we see 2 is this conflict. So as a formalist, we're going to be examining the conflict. We know that Charlie has a conflict with himself, right? That's part of the theme, that examination of the self, and he sort of struggles. And then the last 2 that are super important would be irony and paradox. These are really complex ideas, so I don't expect you to get it right away. But the irony is when you expect something to happen, but you expect one thing to happen, but something else occurs, right? So you look at this image, it says it's always open. So you expect that this place is always going to be open, and then there's a sign that says closed. Sometimes irony can be comical, where it's that point in the reading where you go, wait a minute, what just happened? That's probably a sign that that's irony. And paradox is another one, and we're going to discuss it more specifically, but we have this illustration here, 1 + 1 = 3. I don't know if that's the best illustration to sort of explain paradox, but if you have these 2 ideas that are true, but they can't be true together, and so the 2 are not mutually exclusive, or they are mutually exclusive. Okay, so our last slide, I wanted to really touch on irony and paradox because it is so significant. This is really what drives the text. And so I wanted to point out some examples of irony. I gave you some different types of irony. There's situational, there's verbal, there's dramatic. The situation is where one thing happens and we didn't expect it, we didn't see it coming. Dramatic irony is where the reader knows that it's happening. We know that Charlie's going to die, right? We know that this isn't temporary, but he doesn't, or he eventually finds out because he is brilliant, right? And then he wants to sort of deny it. And then verbal is when it says one thing, but you get something else. So the irony so far in this text, and I'm sure you could probably find some of your own, and I'm seeing like this reoccurring idea here of happiness. Like when I'm looking at the text, I would expect that Charlie would be so happy to be bright, to be intelligent. And what ends up happening, he feels lonely. He's miserable. This isn't the best experience for him, right? And then I also found it ironic that I thought his friends would be happy for him. Man, the people around me in my circle, they would be so happy if I had some sort of enhancement. They would be happy for me. At least they would pretend to be. In this case, that doesn't even happen, right? So it's kind of ironic that these people are his friends, or they're so-called his friends. He values this relationships that he has with them. And instead of being happy for him, they're resentful, they're jealous. So that's ironic. And the ending is ironic. Like, we have come to really, usually we expect like a happy ending, right? We expect everything to be great. Charlie is going to have this wonderful life. He's going to be smart. The mouse and him will live happily ever after. That doesn't happen. So I find it ironic that the ending is the way it is. Now, the paradox, as you can look above, is a statement that seems to contradict itself, but reveals a deeper truth through its contradiction. I think that's really insightful. So we could find specific instances of paradox, but the overall approach would be 2 statements that are true, but cannot occur at the same time. This is a giveaway. As soon as I saw this part, I knew, wait a minute, Charlie has this intelligence. True, that happens in the story. He improves his intelligence. Charlie has these relationships. True, he has these friendships that he values, but the 2 can't happen together. So that is really it for presenting the material on a formalist approach. And it's my hope that as we have our group work and we do our Socratic seminar and our presentations, that this idea of a formalist approach will be reinforced.